the way gravity functions within the universe holds planetary systems together, keeps galaxies spinning. Like, why is that if it is all purely by accident? It should be obvious that design requires a designer. Millions of school children are taught, meet your relatives, and they point to a chimpanzee. What is that based on? It's not based on science. It's based on pseudo-scientific beliefs. Instead, we're going to tell you that we believe that you're designed with purpose, that you are wonderfully made.
Hey everyone, I'm Stuart Deming with Xplrnash. Thank you for watching the podcast. I know we've been absent recently. More content coming soon. We recently closed down our studio, hopefully rebuilding another one strictly for our show. So a lot of really cool things happening. But I am in an incredible studio in Dixon, Tennessee right now at the Wonder Center. And this place is a top-notch museum that you need to come visit. It has one of the best planetariums in the world. I think it's ranked in the top 10 planetariums in the world. But joining me today in his own studio is David Rives, the founder of the Wonder Center. And you have a bunch of other things that you do, too. You also have a podcast called Changing the Narrative, which is right here. And I was just on your show, or we just recorded an episode for your show. So, David, thank you so much for coming on the Xplrnash podcast. We have a lot to get into. We're going to talk about evolution and creationism. We're talking about Christianity and how changing the narrative is a realistic thing, and this is going to be more of a deep dive. If you are an audience member of the Xplrnash podcast, you're going to learn more about my faith and what I believe and what David believes too. But we're going to talk about evolution. We're going to talk about creationism, and these are hard topics that a lot of people do not want to talk about. So we're going to get into it. David, thank you so much. What's your background and how did you get where you are?
Well, first, thanks for what you do, Stuart. But my background, when I was 16 years old, I started taking photos of space, astrophotography, as a hobby. So I would connect cameras to the back of telescopes and try to take pictures of galaxies, nebulae, supernovae that had just happened, things like that. But the first decent picture I got was of the Great Orion Nebula at around 16 years old. My jaw hit the floor because I'd always seen these things in Sky and Telescope magazine. I'd seen Hubble space photography, and I'd always assumed, yeah, that looks beautiful, but they probably colored it. They must have kind of like doctored it a little bit or what.
They added stars.
Yeah, exactly,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm staring at a picture through my telescope, through my camera that I just connected as a hobby, and it is just as vibrant, just as designed, just as beautiful. And again, I was shocked, and it reminded me of Psalm 19. Psalm 19. I've been a Christian, since I was 7 years old, and Psalm 19 says the heavens declare the glory of God. So I always took the Bible seriously, and I'm like, my goodness, this is proof, if you ever needed any, that the heavens declare the glory of God. This is absolutely beautiful, and it looks so designed, right? Which brings me to basically a year later, I was faced with this option because I'd been taking more and more astrophotography.
Where was this in Tennessee?
This is in Middle Tennessee. I grew up in Middle Tennessee, within an hour of Nashville, pretty much my entire life since I was about 7, I suppose. Okay. And so I was in a fairly dark area outside of Nashville, not a lot of light pollution, but the vividness, just everything that I was seeing was so shocking that I said, why is this a hobby? Why am I keeping this to myself? Because I've always loved studying astronomy, astrophysics, cosmology, cosmogony, that sort of thing. So at 18 years old, I actually formed a nonprofit and began to speak on the issues of astronomy, showing the photos that I had taken, but also sharing a design perspective about the universe. Because a lot of times what we read in our science textbooks in high school,
millions of years.
It's like, the universe happened as a result of a Big Bang 14 billion years ago, when the universe created itself from nothing into everything. Stars burst into existence.
And somehow everything was aligned.
Yeah, everything was perfectly aligned, right?
Mm-hmm. Oxygen and these things were just there.
Not just that, Stuart, but think about this. What about physics and laws, right? What defines the laws of gravity? Laws are usually written by someone, okay? But we have this law of gravity that can't be broken within the physical realm, right? So who created that law? Why can't it be broken? Why is it exactly the way it is? And why is it that it just so happens that the way gravity functions within the universe holds planetary systems together, keeps stars from crashing into each other, keeps galaxies spinning? Like, why is that if it is all purely by accident? And so I formed a nonprofit and began speaking about these design features.
So was that more at churches? Was that at like local schools?
Yeah, to begin with, at churches, yes.
Course,
yeah, absolutely. I've got a lot of invitations to speak. But then I produced a documentary at around, I guess I was 18 or 19, called The Heavens Declare the Glory of God. I mean, it was the best that I could do as an 18-year-old. I was on a green screen, and then I would show some of my astrophotography and talk about the physics and this and that and the other. Well, it was quickly translated into Russian, German, Ukrainian. It started getting airtime on TV.
That's crazy.
Mostly Christian TV, but I mean, it's a huge deal. Yeah. And I'm thinking about this.
Especially in like the Orthodox world and...
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, why? Wait a second. I've been going around and I've been speaking in churches to, 500 people here.
30 people there.
30 people there.
Yeah.
2 people here, 1,000 people, right? And yet, based on the number of emails I just got, phone calls we just got, comments, whatever, I just reached more people with one airing on television than I could possibly reach in 5 years of going around speaking at these general events. So media was key, and that's when we basically turned the entire ministry, the entire nonprofit, into a focus of a media ministry where we're producing.
When was this? Like 2007, 2000?
Yeah, this would have been 2008, basically. Okay. And I started creating short form content. First for a news website, so I had a weekly news column on science and the Bible where I would, in 3 to 5 minutes.
Was this on like answersingenesis.org?
No, this was WorldNet Daily. It's one of the top, at the time, it was one of the top 10 news websites in the world. Yeah. I would get, mainstream news. We're talking about
That's huge.
lots of atheists, lots of agnostics who were going to this website reading the content. And so at an early age, 18, 19 years old, I'm posting a video and all of a sudden I get, 20,000, 50,000, 70,000 people watching it over a few days' time. Several thousand comments pouring in, and they're probably 60% hostile.
Of course,
right?
Of course.
You develop a thick skin early on.
Yeah. And you have to.
You have to, because you can't survive in a world like that.
Because at the end of the day, all that matters is what the Lord says about you.
Exactly.
Not what anyone else says about you.
And he told me to produce this content and to produce it about science, but relate it to our Christian walk, right?
Yep.
To not use science falsely, so-called, to not use the old antiquated science, which is what I consider evolutionary theory to be. I mean, it's like going downhill so fast that many scientists are having to replace it with newer ideas. But to actually use modern scientific research, cutting-edge science, which is clearly showing design patterns, complexity, things that can't happen by themselves. And by doing that from that perspective, yes, it ruffled feathers. But I realized that I'm reaching, 50,000, 100,000 people a week with this content. And those people who are commenting the worst comments, I'm talking about the death threats and the really nasty stuff. This content is bothering them so much that they feel the need to respond, not with legitimate science, but with ad hominem attacks. Yeah. In other words, we don't know what to find wrong with this content, so we will just simply make fun of the person, right? Yep. What I realize is that when people do that, it means that it's their conscience talking to them, and they're actually learning from this information. They don't
the Holy Spirit's convicting them.
The Holy Spirit is convicting them.
Yeah, and hopefully that the Holy Spirit's convicting them ultimately to follow Jesus.
Exactly. Yes. And that may take years.
Yeah, that may take a lifetime. It may never happen.
It may never happen. But for me, it's worth it.
Yeah.
So that's Early on, I got started in media, and it turned into
you've produced like 5,000 videos. Like, it's insane what you've produced over the last 15, 20 years.
Between the short form content and I do tons of 30-minute like broadcast TV stuff. Yeah, between that, thousands upon thousands upon thousands, which is a huge opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
Basically, it's
and you have no idea that video that you made 6 years ago. You have no idea how it's going to impact somebody 10 years from now.
Well, Stuart, that's the point, because I was on TV on a television program that I did called Creation with David Rives for probably several years, right? And finally, and you can get discouraged every now and then. Everybody gets discouraged. They're like, am I really making an impact?
Yeah.
And I realize we're not talking to a totally Christian audience here, but for me, the idea that someone would accept Christ is a big deal, right?
Yes.
And so I'm a little discouraged. I go to the post office and I pick up, the mail. And with TV, you still get a lot of physical mail, right? Some of these letters I can't read because they're in languages that I don't understand. And then there's this letter. And I remember, I'm like, I'm just going to open up one or two of these letters while I'm sitting here in the car, So I break open the letter, I pull it out. And it is this fellow who says, David, I've been watching you faithfully week after week after week after week, talking about science and then talking about Christianity. He said, and after this last program, I just couldn't help it any longer. I dropped to my knees. I accepted Christ.
Praise the Lord.
And that, to me, is worth all of the struggles that it took to get to that place. And the money. It takes, as you know,
We've put a lot of money towards it.
To produce quality content.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. And Stuart, you know this more than anybody, but the quality of the content is important.
Yes.
If you start to produce cheesy content that is very bad quality, it's poorly produced, then people see that and they say, and for me, they see that content and they say, that's that Christian stuff, right? Because that's the perception that many people have. So my idea is, well, hey, the world has unlimited budgets, unlimited funding, they have unlimited resources, and they do an incredible job at production. What if we spent just as much time with the production value as we did with the message, so that the message is actually palatable and they're not having to listen to horrible audio, they're not having to watch stuff that they with blurry footage that they can barely see, right?
Or terrible storytelling.
Or terrible storytelling.
Christian content 20 years ago was so awful. It was so terrible. You're like, why? What? I see your dead cat in this video. I see these terrible things.
Right.
I literally, that came to a question. What's your thoughts? I know we're changing subject a little bit. What's your thoughts on Angel Studios and The Chosen and what they're doing and what they're building in the Christian realm? Sound of Freedom, one of the only movies that made over $100 million in 2023. These incredible pieces of Christian content coming out recently.
They're changing the narrative, literally, because they've taken that whole perception of Christian media and they've turned it on its head. And they're like, well, we may not have to spend the exact same Hollywood budget, but we're going to do the best we can and put that production level to a point where it's a major Hollywood release. And it's happening. And we're seeing we're seeing content that I would say is not only on par with Hollywood,
it's better,
but is better.
Yeah.
And it also has a message. It's not just frivolous. It's not just all action, but the action has a purpose of telling a story that will impact someone's life, or it will make them think about something in a different way.
Especially the TV show The Chosen.
Yeah.
With the scene of feeding 5,000 people. They had 5,000 extras show up, and they did that for free.
Yes.
And they're the ones that kept theaters in place because they released their show. And so they're they're just allowing life change to happen with the content that they're making. And so it's an incredible thing. But we are sitting in a place that you said 2 years ago did not exist.
Right.
And it's called the Wonder Center in Dixon, Tennessee, an hour away from Nashville. What is this place, and how did it be? How did it come to be?
It was a shell of a building 2 years ago with very little vision, and without vision, people perish.
Yes.
And I realized that there was the opportunity to have a vision for something that would not just impact Nashville and the Middle Tennessee community, but have a global impact. and that is to create the largest science museum in the world that is a full-blown science museum. We're over 100,000 square feet.
Which is bigger than some museums in Nashville.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's I mean, we're the largest science museum in Tennessee, but by far the largest in the world that promotes Christian values. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is you're going to walk through a science museum, which, again, we just opened months ago, but now we're fully open. You're walking through, and you're going to walk into the wonders of paleontology. You're going to walk into the wonders of biology. You're going to walk into the wonders of zoology and see live animals. You'll see, the full-size 55-foot-long dinosaurs as you walk through. You're going to see. What you won't find is you're not going to walk into the anthropology section, and we're not going to show you a chimpanzee with an arrow pointing at it saying, "This is you." That's literally what millions of school children are taught when they walk into the American Museum of Natural History. It's like, meet your relatives, and they point to a chimpanzee, okay? Well, what is that based on? What is that? It's not based on science. It's based on pseudo-scientific beliefs that somehow animals have changed over time in such radical ways that a fish turned into a bird, which turned into an ape, which turned into a man, and you are nothing more than a highly evolved, intelligent ape that is sitting here philosophizing over your existence, right? So in other words, what I'm telling you is we have all of the science, but we leave out the pseudo-scientific beliefs that cannot be supported with the scientific evidence. Instead, we're going to tell you that we believe that you're designed with purpose, that you're not an accident of the cosmos, that you are wonderfully made.
So with all of that in mind, you also have a coffee shop on site. You have a dinner theater. You have a commercial kitchen. And then you have a production studio to do all of your production. Like this is something that can just dramatically change the community of Dixon from a live event standpoint. From a job standpoint, it can employ people. Like this is something that can also change lives physically through cash. And
so true.
So my first thoughts when I walked into this museum is I said, Lord, thank you for David taking a risk to tell his story. And it's an incredible museum. I've been into a lot of museums, and it's incredibly fascinating to watch somebody tell the story of Jesus. And I know you're not necessarily saying Jesus
right
here, but this is the story of Jesus.
It is.
Jesus is the creator. He is the sustainer.
Yeah. How do you talk about nature, which I believe is God's creation, without talking about the creator? Right? It's almost necessary, and it should be obvious that design requires a designer. Yes. When you say, look at the design of human anatomy, what your anatomy professor is telling you is that it implies a designer, right? We don't say, look at the design of, that guitar or the vehicle that you're driving and say, yes, isn't it amazing what time and chance can accomplish, right?
Yeah.
So to talk about the designer and who that is, and according to the Bible, the designer is not just the God of the universe, the one who spoke everything to existence, but the designer is ultimately Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Who created all things in the beginning, and then he took on flesh to come to this earth to live with us and to die as a sinless sacrifice in payment for our sins. So the gospel message is really integral to understanding anything about the universe, and we're not ashamed to point that out in subtle ways. We're not bashing anyone over the head with it, but we're not afraid to point it out.
All right, so there is a narrative now of, hey, this Big Bang happened, and it's I always like this analogy of for the guitar, for example. Yeah. Even if you shook it all up, all the pieces together, would it ever produce a guitar?
Yes.
There's no physical way possible that can ever happen. No. So there is this narrative of evolution, that we came from apes, we came from these other animals, these microorganisms, and they evolved into these things. Let's talk about the difference between macro and microevolution real quick, because there is small changes in species that does happen throughout generations.
Right.
So let's talk about that, and then we'll get deeper into this topic.
Okay, so This is a lesson. I have a presentation. I go around to universities and present the language of evolution. Because it's a bait and switch tactic.
It is.
Okay.
They try changing language.
Yes.
To make it fit their narrative.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so what I tell people is, if you are this Christian who is extremely strong in your stance against Darwinian evolution, and you have someone who comes up to you and they say, you're one of those Christians, you probably don't even believe in evolution, do you? A lot of times, the audiences I talk to, they emphatically, the whole auditorium will go, no, right? And I'm like, you just gave the wrong answer.
Yes.
The answer to that question is not no, it is, what do you mean by evolution? Okay? To which the skeptic, the secular scientists will reply. They're going to say, well, I'm talking about adaptation. Oh, you mean that animals can adapt in small ways. In other words,
to their environment. Yes.
To their environment, right? So in other words, you can have a cattle which can be bred to different types of cattle, but they're still all cows, right? You're talking about dogs, where in this dog family, this canid family, you can have a vast variety of dogs, right? You're talking about adaptation, small adaptations to an environment. Yeah, of course. Well, if that's what you mean by evolution, then yes, I believe in evolution. Okay? Oh, well, no, that's not what I mean by evolution. No, what I mean is mutations. Oh, mutations. You're talking about tiny changes within the genetic code, mostly harmful, very seldom beneficial, but changes that happen all the time, changes that we see every day in the lab. If that's what you mean by evolution, then yeah, I guess I believe in evolution.
But then there's also the idea of man-made mutations.
Right.
In these animals.
Absolutely.
Like look at the mustard seed and how they've made broccoli, and they've
yes.
made these things out of this mustard seed.
And same thing goes on with breeding. Same thing yes. goes on with plants. So, absolutely, all of that. If that's what you call evolution, well, then I guess I believe in evolution, right? What about survival of the fittest? No, survival of the fittest is what I mean. Oh, you mean that the fastest impala is going to get away from the lion, and the slowest impala is going to get eaten? Yeah. Okay, well, I guess I do believe in evolution, if that's what you call evolution. But here's the question. Did the impala, the slow impala, change? No. It's dead. It got eaten by the lion. Did the fast impala change? No. It remained fast. Its offspring remained fast. It did not change into a cheetah. Okay? So we're not seeing these massive changes. Same thing with any of these other things. With mutations, we haven't changed a mustard seed into an oak tree. We haven't changed broccoli into a banana, okay? You see what I'm saying? In other words, these are genetic boundaries within the different kinds, the different species, the different families of organisms that can't be crossed. We've never seen them crossed. Science has never been able to replicate this, which means that yes, we see adaptation, but we do not see one creature turning into another. And that is the type of evolution that I outright reject, because it's pseudoscience. It's never been observed. It's never been demonstrated. It can't be tested in a lab. And if it takes so much time, you see, this is the magic ingredient, because a lot of times, if I were to tell you, okay, tomorrow that giraffe is going to wake up as a hippopotamus, you're going to laugh. Okay, but what if I said that giraffe over millions and millions of years might change into a different creature? Well, all of a sudden you're like, well, you mean just like tiny changes every generation will eventually equal something different? Yeah. Well, then that might be plausible. Wait a second. What's the only difference? Time. The magic ingredient is time. I told you if it changed overnight, you wouldn't believe it. But if it changes over millions of years, somehow you're going to believe it. It's like all of a sudden it might become plausible. Well, the magic ingredient there is time ultimately, but time has not shown that it can do anything to species. Species will adapt to their situation, but enough time will never change one species to another, one family to another. That's because genetic boundaries exist which cannot be broken. Where did they come from? I think they came from, in the beginning, God created these types of families of animals with enough variety that they could fit their situation. If it got cold, they can grow longer fur, but one creature is not going to turn into another creature because it's programmed that way. Just like you're not going to take a Windows computer and turn it into a Mac computer. Just like you're not going to take a guitar and turn it into an automobile. There are boundaries within an engineered organism as to how far you can take it.
That was great. This is coming from Aaron. Can you explain the differences in worldviews between the sciences? So, in creationism and the general belief of evolution.
Yeah. The differences between creation versus evolution. There are two different worldviews, and those two different worldviews are they're diametrically opposed, really. There have been attempts to try to connect the two together. But when we look at creation as it is described in the book of Genesis, in the Bible, the book of Genesis is written as an historical narrative, okay? And what that means is that there are ages, dates, specific details. It's like a fairy tale typically says a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there were these alien creatures and they did this and they did that. They rode around on spacecraft. There's a story in there, but there aren't specific details. A history book says, well, in such and such a date, George Washington did this and said this, and here's an exact quote, and blah, blah, blah. Specific details. What we have in the book of Genesis throughout a lot of that narrative is an historical narrative, which appears to be a history book telling us about the origin of the universe. It tells us exactly the order in which creation happened. In other words, it tells us that in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The earth was formless. It had nothing inhabiting it, right? It was a formless void. And basically, God creates light. He creates plants. He creates the sun, the moon, the stars. He creates animals, and then he creates people, okay? And that order is very specific, and it's actually spelled out multiple times. So there should not be any question as to what it's trying to represent, right? It's pretty clear. That's the creation narrative, okay? That's what I believe. Evolution, in general, I'm not speaking for all evolutionists because, of course, there are some intricacies involved, but for the most part, states that 14 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe was contracted into a very hot, dense area, smaller than the period on a page, which then rapidly expanded, creating space and time as it went. Now, as the universe expanded, matter simply got together. It started forming stars. Those stars exploded. They exploded multiple times. That created all of the elements. The elements then somehow got together and formed planets. The planets all got together, and eventually the planets came alive and started teeming with life, as we have here on Earth, right? That's the evolutionary narrative. What have we just done here? Well, we have completely replaced the creation narrative because creation started with Earth as being specially created to be inhabited, and then the rest of the universe was created to represent God's artistic handiwork, right? His canvas where he can show off how big he is, right? But the Earth is special. On the evolutionary perspective, everything happens by chance. The stars are the first things to happen. And here we are.
Day 4 of creation.
Right. Here we are on Earth as happy accidents.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the order of everything is very, very different. And even if we try to insert time within the creation narrative, within that historical narrative, you say, well, let's just say that each day is 1,000,000 years. Well, 1,000,000 years is not long enough for evolution to take place. Okay, I mean, evolution is, according to evolutionists, an incredibly complex process that takes tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years to create the organisms that we see today. So you can't just simply insert millions of years into the creation account. It doesn't work. What if we insert billions of years?
So with that in mind, it's day 3 God created the plants.
Yes.
Day 4, God
created
the sun, and we get photosynthesis from the sun.
The sun. And almost all plants work.
How did those plants work?
Yeah, so most plants work through photosynthesis. Most plants have to have sunlight, right? So if we try to simply insert time within the days of creation, then what that does is it puts plants being created, they're all sitting here on Earth, which is engulfed in darkness without sunlight, and they have to sit around. And there is a light. There is
the glory of God, but
which is a supernatural light. Yeah,
is that allowing the plants to survive?
When you're talking about supernatural elements, you can say anything you want to say. You could say that God supernaturally allowed the plants not to use photosynthesis for 1 billion years while the stars had time to form and all of this and naturally form. You can say anything you want to say, but then you're kind of getting out of the historical context of the book of Genesis. And again, I find that it is incredibly historical, all the way up through the flood and beyond. I mean,
even the story of Abraham.
The story of Abraham. You've got
Joseph
dates, you've got names, you've got ages, you've got locations, details that, again, you don't find in normal everyday myths, right? There are so many flood legends throughout history. Every major civilization has a flood legend, right? But most of those flood legends don't have details. It's just this. It's almost as if they took a real historical account, something that actually happened, and then they just kind of created this fairy tale around it, right? But then you go back to the Genesis record, and it records a flood that took place, and it gives the days of the months when the rain started happening, exactly how long this giant flood lasted, exactly the methods in which it was the waters were engulfed, how long the rain happened, how old was everybody when they stepped foot on the ark, when they got off of the ark. This is what you would read in the encyclopedia. If you were to go to Wikipedia and look up any historical figure, those are the types of details that you would expect to see. So it lends credence to the idea that we should be paying more attention to the creation historical narrative and maybe less to the evolutionary theories, because the evolutionary theories state, in the beginning, 14 billion years ago, all matter was contracted in space, and it began to expand, creating space and time. Wait a second. Let's go over that again. 14 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe was in a tiny spot, which began to expand, creating space and time. One more time. 14 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe. Let's stop, Stuart. Where did all the matter in the universe come from? Ask an astrophysicist. They will, I don't care who you ask. If they are a PhD in astrophysicist, they're going to tell you, well, that's something we don't know. We simply don't have an answer to that. But we're not attempting to answer that, right? We're the astrophysicists. We're trying to explain how everything works right now. So the philosophers will figure that out, right? You ask the philosophers, and they're like, well, no, we're not really working on the origin theory from an evolutionary perspective. Well, you need to go ask the geologists, because obviously matter is geology, rocks, matter. So go ask the geologists. You go ask the geologists, and they're like, no, that's the astronomer's problem, right? They keep pushing it around because nobody has an answer as to where matter came from a natural perspective.
Do you think most people don't have that answer because they don't want to be held accountable?
Some people, yes. Some PhD scholars don't have the answer because they don't want to be held accountable to a higher power. If there is a creator, then that means that they're his creation and that they're accountable to his rules. They can't be their own gods. Yes. But then there are so many people who have never sat down, just like you and I are doing today, to think about these issues. In other words, they've never actually pondered the fact we don't know where matter comes from.
And we never will.
Right? Because what does the first law of thermodynamics state? It states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Einstein comes along and he's like, well, matter is an expression of energy, so matter cannot be created nor destroyed. That's a law. It's the law, okay? The first law of thermodynamics tells us this. So you have to break a law of science in order to create matter.
Yeah.
Where did the matter come from? That's the reason that most secular scientists don't want to touch this issue, is because you have to break laws of science, and they know it. You have to manipulate laws of science to originate matter. Or you have to know someone who is outside of the universe, who is not held accountable to its laws.
Or time.
No time, no matter. He's not accountable to the laws of time, of matter, of space. He's outside of it all and is able to, as the originator of time, space, and matter, is able to create matter from nothing. So in order to have matter, you have to have a supernatural principle. One way or the other. Whether you believe in God or not, you have to have a supernatural origin. When I say supernatural, I mean beyond the natural laws.
Yep.
No matter if you believe in God or not, you have to have a supernatural origin for matter. And so what's the most logical supernatural origin? Maybe it's a supernatural origin that we actually have a history book that goes along with it.
So what's the similarities and differences between the creation worldview and the evolutionary worldview? So let's do similarities first.
Similarities between the majority of creation versus evolutionists, that the universe probably had a beginning.
At some point, that is a very similar thing.
Yes. Yeah, it's very similar. And it hasn't always been believed, by the way, by the secular community, because there was something called the steady state theory that was very popular way less than 100 years ago.
Back in the 70s and 80s, right?
Yeah. Mainly 60s. It started to lose popularity in the 60s. Basically, here's what happened. There was a fellow in 1918 by the name of Vesto Slipher. He's using the Lowell Observatory telescopes in Flagstaff, and he says, I'm measuring a Doppler shift, a red shift, for distant galaxies. Okay, so what this is like when a train passes or an ambulance passes,
so
right?
Like the vibration
changes.
Yes.
Okay. So as an ambulance is coming towards you, it's going woo 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 woo. Well, as soon as those sound waves are compressed, right? And then they expand as they move away from you, it changes pitch. It goes woo, 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 right?
Because it's the vibrations in the air are broken.
Yes, those are those waves in the air. Yep. Yes. Same thing happens to light, okay? Same exact thing happens to light. So light that is moving away from us, that light gets stretched. It gets redshifted. It's about those waves again. So Vesto sees this in some distant galaxies. He's like, those galaxies are flying away from us, just like the ambulance is moving away from us. We see those waves stretched out. We see the redshift. He's like, so randomly, galaxies in the universe are flying away from us. And then there was a Belgian Jesuit priest by the name of Georges Lemaitre who said, wait a second, Vesto, what if you got this wrong? I think this was 1928. He said, what if, instead of randomly galaxies flying away from us, what if the entire universe is being stretched out? Okay? What if, like, you imagine the universe as this fabric that is being stretched, and so everything's always getting farther away from everything else, and that's what you're seeing. And that actually works. It actually explains what we see in cosmology. So Einstein picks up on this as he's developing his theories of relativity, and he says, my goodness, all of my formulae for general relativity, for GR, works with an expanding universe, not with a steady state universe that's just always been sitting here for eternity. So Einstein showed us, through equations that the universe seems to be expanding, therefore the universe probably had a beginning.
Yeah.
And that's one of the extreme similarities between creation and evolution. And that is also where it starts to diverge, because there's not a lot of similarities after that. The two are radically different. You approach science radically different. With evolutionary theory, with Darwinian evolution, I call that universal common descent. Everything in the universe commonly descends from a single-celled organism.
Yep.
With that theory, you basically have to have extreme changes happening over time to turn a single-celled amoeba into an astronaut, okay? But according to biblical history from a creation standpoint, you've got something radically different because you have engineering design built into each type of animal. In other words, if I'm building a four-wheel drive truck, well, then I'm going to build it completely different than if I'm building a sports car. If I'm building a sports car, it's going to be completely different from my 18-wheeler, okay? And I'm going to engineer it completely different. In other words, I'm going to build a switch on my four-wheel drive vehicle where I can change from two-wheel drive to four-wheel drive to save fuel economy. I'm going to build a sports car lower to the ground. It's going to look completely different. I'm going to build my 18-wheeler where it's got incredible pulling power, where it can withstand a lot of abuse, where it can run hundreds of thousands of miles, right? So I'm going to engineer each one of those things incredibly different. They have similarities. They all have wheels. They all have a steering wheel. They all have a windshield, but they're very, very different beasts, right? So you push this into the world today, and we look at us and we're like, well, if God is if this world is engineered, then he's going to make us quite different with different mechanisms and different abilities than he is a house cat. You know, he's going to create that cat completely different than he creates a whale that swims in the deep ocean, right? There are going to be engineering patterns where the cat has all of the features that it needs to survive as a cat. There are going to be engineering features within the whale that allows it to go deep in the ocean and hold its breath for amazing amounts of time. And then there are going to be engineering features within us that allows bipedal motion, like allows us to walk on two legs, to run, to do what we need to do, to manipulate our fingers very, very well. And our brains are completely different at the same time.
So biblically, you're talking about the imago Dei. Humans are
made in the image of God.
Made in the image of God.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that. That you and I are made in the image of God, and what does that mean?
Yeah. Made in the image of God is a phrase that we read in the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He creates animals. And then he said, let us create man in our image, in the likeness of us, right?
And at that point, he's talking about the Trinity.
Right.
So let us create. So
let us
Father,
is
Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Which implies that Jesus is having this, even though he doesn't exist in the flesh, is having this impact on creation at that very moment, right? Mm-hmm. In the image of God. Which means that while animals are very sophisticated, which means that they can communicate in their own ways, which means that they do have their own type of language, they don't sit and philosophize. They don't have the same mind, and they don't even have the same soul, the same spirit that we do. Because as made in the image of God, we actually have not just a nephesh, a soul that is living, but we also have this conscience that speaks to us. Where when the lion kills the impala, it's like my next meal. If we go out there and we're like, yeah, I want to kill one of my neighbors, there's this check. Does it happen? Yes, occasionally it happens. But for the majority of humankind, there's this check that happens where you're just like, oh, I don't think this doesn't feel right.
It's called a moral compass.
It's a moral compass. It's basically our conscience. It's the Holy Spirit speaking to us, saying, no, this is not I didn't create you to be another animal. You're not random chance, but you're also not just a highly evolved animal. You're created with a purpose to worship me.
Yeah, and that's the imago Dei. So some other questions regarding the different worldviews. What's the biggest challenges for each worldview? So let's start with evolution. What's the biggest challenge to get people to believe that? And I want to go further in that. Over the last 150 years, you have these different political regimes.
Yes.
Communism is the biggest one. Fascism. You have these political regimes that believe the specific thing, so those governments do not personally have to be accountable.
Correct.
To a creator.
Yeah.
But so let's get into the biggest challenge for evolution, and then let's talk about these political regimes.
I got you. It's a great question because the challenges for evolution it's several hundred years old. It's actually several thousand years old. I mean, it was first proposed by ancient Greek philosophers who stated that things could burst into existence spontaneously and turn from one thing to another. And Darwin picked up on that. Erasmus Darwin, Charles Darwin's grandfather, picked up on all of that, and he's like, well, I guess we could say that everything came from the sea. So he rode around in a carriage, a horse-drawn carriage, with a picture of a conch shell on it, and it says everything from seashells. Okay? Charles Darwin picks up on that, and he's like, well, this helps me void myself of the moral obligations. And
because he was a man known for, historically known, like not known well in the community, like as a vile man.
He had his challenges. Yep. He married someone closely related to him. Yep. Which again, if he'd have read the scriptures, it says, don't marry extremely closely related. So the Bible doesn't give the reason for that. It doesn't need to. You should just obey it, right? He didn't obey that. He married someone extremely close to him. His children had birth defects. Yep. That's because of the overlapping genetic codes that God knew about. He told us about in his words, but Darwin didn't believe that, right? So his children had birth defects. He had some serious problems in family. Therefore, he's like, why, God? Why would you do this? Why would you? So he basically rejects God, and he says, I need an alternate view that helps me believe that everything is accident and anything that happens is simply to the wind. Basically, we can be our own gods, choose for ourselves what's right and wrong. So he comes up with this theory based on other philosophers, not with scientific evidence, but simply to support his belief. It took the scientific world by storm, because in science we love something revolutionary, right? We always love what's the newest thing. And once he got a few professors to start accepting it as a possibility, well, the professors began spouting it, the students picked up on it. When the students became professors, their students believed it, it started to get passed on. Okay, that's how evolution gained popularity, not because of its scientific standing. The challenges for evolutionary theory are that it's hundreds of years old, it is a failing theory, and it is basically...
What do you mean by failing?
It's failing because it doesn't have the powers to explain what we see with current science.
Like what you can see on a microscope.
Which you can see in a microscope. Charles Darwin looked through a primitive lens, and he sees a cell as a simple bag of enzymes, a bag of meat, right? No, it's more complex than the city of Nashville, okay, with all of these mechanisms that are going on. So he doesn't know this. We know this today. We're like, how does the cell simply happen? It's not a bag of enzymes or bag of meat. The cell has design patterns. There's no way to explain that with evolution. There have been attempts, and there are failed attempts. So it's time that we start ditching the theories of evolution. And many scientists, there's still many that do believe, but many scientists are saying, yeah, it's time for an alternative theory. There are too many design patterns for this to be random chance. There's too much complexity with design, so therefore there must be a designer. Now, not everyone's moving towards the God of the Bible. They're like, design requires a designer.
Design,
Aliens, right? We could go anywhere we wanted to go with intelligent design. We could say, yes, science is showing design patterns which require a designer, therefore the designer maybe is aliens. Aliens pushes back the problem because aliens must have a creator, right? Yeah. Aliens can't happen by chance. So you have to have someone outside of the universe which is able to manipulate the laws of the universe in order to ultimately create the universe and create life. Those are the huge problems facing evolutionary philosophers. And when I say philosophers, that's all there are anymore. There's no such thing as evolutionary science. It doesn't exist because evolution is a dying theory needing to be replaced. There's only philosophers who are trying to figure out a way to keep it from dying. For creation, for a worldview that states that the universe is designed, what are our difficulties? I'd have to think about it for a moment. I would say that we're looking at a supernatural origin, right? Mm-hmm. Therefore, we can be criticized. That might be one of our difficulties. But everything requires a supernatural. All life and matter itself requires a supernatural origin.
Yes.
So the only criticism that can truly be leveled towards the idea of creation is the idea that you need an origin for matter and life outside of the natural world. But we need that regardless.
Mm-hmm.
All science is telling us that you have to break laws of science.
Do you think one of the challenges is, it comes back to the same question I asked earlier.
Yeah.
Do people want to be held accountable?
Yeah. And I don't want to make a blanket statement.
And I don't want to make a blanket statement either, but personally, I don't want to be held accountable.
Right. Right. That is human nature, is that we would love to justify ourselves.
My pride says, hey, don't acknowledge this to God.
Yeah.
Like, I can do what I want to do.
Isn't that the lie from the beginning, right? If we trust that the Bible is true and that Genesis is real history, it's like Satan tells Eve, it's like, did God really say that? All you have to do is disobey his command, do the one thing he told you not to do, and you will be just like him. You're going to know good, you're going to know evil, you're going to be a God yourself, right? And there's this human nature inside each and every one of us that wants us to be God. We want to choose for ourselves what's right and what's wrong. Again, that moral compass is the only thing that stands in the way. But you can circumvent that moral compass.
Through ideological belief, through circumstances, through different things.
Joseph Stalin is a great instance.
And that's why I brought up communism.
Yeah. Stalin,
because he did this thing.
He did this.
Justified this.
Using evolution.
Evolution, yes. And that's why I brought it up. We'll get to that in a second. It's the idea of, so now we need to go back to this question, because I think some people in our audience will ask us this. Yeah. If God is the creator, Yahweh, not just a God, Yahweh.
Yahweh.
If he is the creator with his son Jesus, and that's getting into weeds that we will never understand. Then why did he create us to either choose him or to choose sin? And what does sin mean?
You are touching on something that is so theological, right here,
and that's why, like, I asked that question of, okay, if I can't believe this creation story, because I don't want to be held accountable personally. There's times I don't want to be held accountable for the things that I intentionally do that is against the holiness of God.
Yeah,
I don't want that accountability.
The question you just asked requires us to make statements about the nature of God. But here's what I will state. Would you rather be a robot that has no ability to choose right or wrong, and so you simply are forced to obey that master? For me, I think I would rather have the difficult option now and then to go against what he has said or to follow him. And I think that he, and again, I'm not speaking for God here, but it seems to me that he would appreciate that as well. If he really wants to have a relationship with us as his creation, that he would give us that opportunity to make bad choices so that those who do make good choices are truly trying to have a relationship with their creator. And again, I know that's a hard thing to understand, and it probably will never be understood, but there has to be consequences for actions. There has to be the presence of good and evil in order for that to become clear.
Yes. Maybe give clarification on that. Yeah. If somebody is like, okay, I don't believe that there's a God. I do believe in this evolutionary theory. Like, I believe that man just exists to exist, and we can live however we want. We could drink and eat and do whatever we want.
Yeah.
But I don't believe in accountability.
And that's okay. That's your choice, right? What I always say in that situation is, you can choose not to believe in the accountability of God. I mean, he gave us 10 rules. He wrote them in stone. They're pretty simple. They're fairly straightforward. Almost any philosopher in existence is going to look through those set of 10 rules, and they're going to say, this is actually for the betterment of society. This will never hurt society to do these 10 simple things, right? You can choose to disobey, right? But if there is even the slightest option, even the slightest chance that you don't know everything in this universe, that you could be wrong about your assumption that there is no God, then what if I'm right? What if there is a creator who has asked simple things of you, who really wants to have a relationship with you, but if you don't repent from that sin and accept him, then you'll be separated from him for eternity. Are you willing to take that chance?
So in that moment, define what sin is.
Sin is the transgression of the law. Sin is anomia in the Greek, which is basically transgression of the law. The law is the law. Just like there are laws of the universe, there are laws of gravity, there are laws of thermodynamics.
There's laws of civilization.
There are laws of civilization. There are laws for society. And those laws, again, are very, very basic. Don't murder other people, right? Don't
cover
lie.
Your neighbor's wife.
Don't cover. Exactly. These are basics. And one of those laws says, don't make other gods for yourself, because I, Yahweh, am your the only true God, right? Okay, so super basic stuff, but he's basically saying worship me, right? Is one of those rules, right? You can choose to disobey that. But why would you choose to disobey that when these laws will better society, they will better you as a person, and there is a chance, even the remotest chance, that you could be wrong about there being nothing after death, and that you could actually have the opportunity to be with your creator for eternity? Why wouldn't you? It's a simple, to me, it's so obvious. The only thing that gets in the way is that human nature is that, the sinful behavior, the adultery, those things that go against those laws, those are kind of fun. So I think that outweighs the possibility, right? And some people think that. But again, I find it as a no-brainer.
So now answer the question of, okay, I don't believe in eternity. And that's we don't know. We have no idea.
There is no way in this life to even understand eternity, because we live in a finite period of time, right? There is no way to understand it. There is no way to know unless you are revealed that. And I think if you're truly searching, that the Lord will reveal that to you.
Yes, I agree. Yes, I agree.
But again, it's okay to question. Here's the thing. A lot of people say, you Christians, all you have is faith. All right. It's just just faith in this, faith in that. To which I reply, I do have faith, but it is not a blind faith. It's an evidence faith based on things that I have personally seen. It is a faith that is based on so much observable evidence within the scientific community that it's so obvious, right?
Can you give some examples?
Okay, so a faith,
especially on your digs, you have done these digs around the world, and you've been able to look at these bones, and you were telling me a story the last time I saw you of how you, in one of the bones that you found, they're still not what was the word that you used, but it was still active, the bones was still
original
active.
Biomolecules.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing. If we're faced with two options here, we can have faith in the secular paleontological community, which states that 66 plus million years ago, dinosaurs went extinct. They were buried they were basically killed in a massive meteor strike. And the bones that we find today are from that event, okay? You have to have faith, because that's making a historical claim that can't be proven. There were no history books 66 plus million years ago. There were no people around 66 million.
But the word dinosaur didn't come around until 1831, 1835.
Exactly.
And Marco Polo, the trader that was from Europe trading with China, he was talking about how he was trading these massive lizards.
Yes.
In his documents. And how inside of the Smithsonian there's a skeleton, or not a skeleton, a footprint of a massive animal and a human right next to it. Yeah. Explain to me that.
Well, okay, so those are the kind of evidences that people will see. You've got the faith of evolutionary theory, and then you've got the faith of those who take the Genesis account as literal. And that is, if Genesis is true, then there was a massive catastrophic event that took place about 4,500 years ago, covered the earth in sediment, water, muds, sand, silts rapidly, and it buried a lot of creatures, okay? So now, I lead dinosaur digs. I take, 40 people out, children and adults. Frankly, I mean, I love dinosaurs. Adults love dinosaurs too. So
I was going to wear my dinosaur shirt, but it was dirty. That's why I wore the donut shirt. But
we dig up giant creatures, okay? In some cases, and this has happened at least in 200 secular published journals so far in reports, but we've also been able to replicate it ourselves. We're finding bones of these massive creatures. We pull them out. We plaster jacket them. We pull them out. We get them back to a lab. We break them open, and carefully, of course. And inside, there are still blood vessels, collagen, soft tissues, osteocytes, proteins that should not be there, original biomolecules. So, in other words, the exterior of the bone has started to fossilize, has started to turn to stone. That's because it's been over 4,000 years, okay? But inside, some of the original material still remains, and in fact, the exterior fossilization and how fast it was buried has helped preserve
because
what was
of
inside.
The amount of pressure
Correct.
at that, yes.
So I have faith that the biblical account is true, and yet I'm finding scientific evidences to support that faith. Scientific evidences that at this point have been documented in secular journals again and again and again and again and again. And when secularists are faced with this discovery, they're faced with two options. They're like, okay, well, either dinosaurs did not go extinct 66 plus million years ago. Obviously, we were wrong about those dates. Or somehow blood vessels can still stretch after 66 plus million years, right? Now, again, it comes back to that whole accountability thing and how far are you willing to take it?
Yeah.
Some paleontologists are willing to accept that second as a more likely alternative. They're like, somehow, soft tissue, stretchy blood vessels, I guess they just survived for 60-something million years.
So if you look at the biblical account of Genesis 4, 4 and 5, where it talks about these people that would live almost 1,000 years.
Yeah.
That's really hard for us to comprehend because God did say, hey, I'm going to limit the age of people to 120. He said that. So, but like you have Adam, 963 years. You have these people that live for 1,000 years. But then you look at what's happening with certain reptiles.
Yes.
And these reptiles that are older than America, there is turtles that are older than the country of America, still walking on this earth. They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so if you have animals that are constantly getting bigger, that are older than the United States of America, and they live 2,000 years or 1,000 years, they could be massive, the size of the room that we're in.
They could.
And so
that can absolutely help explain some of the gigantism that we see. But we touched on something earlier that I think also helps explain it, and that is genetic entropy. Okay?
Yeah.
Let's just say that evolution has been taking place for millions of years. Creatures are evolving into other types of creatures, turning into these different types of animals, right? Well, what happens is genes get corrupted over time. Mutations slip in. Solar radiation will give cancers and this and that. And so our genetic pool is getting less healthy the more time that passes.
Yes.
All right. So let's say we've been around for millions of years. Things should be going down, degrading. In fact, things should be so degraded that there shouldn't be anything in existence, okay? Instead of what is commonly believed for evolution, that everything gets better and better and better and better. Let's just say that the biblical history for a second is true and that there was a catastrophic event where that wiped out the world and only 8 people on Noah's Ark survived. At least four of those, it would be 4 of those 8 people were related.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That means they had similar genes.
Yeah.
We talked about inbreeding earlier,
mm-hmm.
and how Darwin even got caught up in this, right? Well, now all of a sudden, at around 4,500 year mark, you've got the entire human population culled down to 8 people, and those 8 people have to start the families that will begin civilization,
mm-hmm.
right? 4 of which who are related to each other. that means that there is going to be some inbreeding take place, that there's going to be less healthy gene pool to select from.
Yep.
Look at the ages immediately before this account in biblical history. That's where you get your 900 years, your 700 years, your 800 years.
They're depending on what circles you're running with, there's conversations that I've heard that Noah may have met Adam.
Right.
At one point.
Right.
Because Noah was 500 and something years old when the flood happened.
That's hard for us to grasp.
Yeah.
But historically, it actually makes sense, because if the biblical history is correct, go just right after the flood, right after this gene pool was narrowed. All of a sudden, lifespans drop down to 400 years, 200 years.
120.
100, yeah. Isn't that something? Is that coincidence that the Bible would have these exact figures recorded? Or could it be that it's literal historical events taking place, and that pivotal moment 4,500 years ago or so, that gigantic flood culled not just the gene pool of people, but it also culled the gene pool of the animal kingdom as well, making animals less big, less robust, living not as long. It makes perfect sense. So when you say that you have faith to believe in the Bible, I have people come up to me all the time, and they're like, "You're a Christian. Yeah, you're one of those that believes in an ancient collection of fairy tales written by goat herders, aren't you?" Right?
Yeah.
And to that, I raise my hand and I'm like, "You got a portion of that correct." Yes, I'm a Christian. I believe in an ancient collection of writings written by ancient goat herders, shepherds, poets, kings. They weren't scientists, yet somehow they seem to get all the science correct. All right? They weren't really historians for the most part, and yet the history lines up perfectly with the scientific events that we know what happens, and the historical events which we know happen, and the record that the earth has left us, which lines up with those events. They got the prophecy correct. They got the gospel message correct. These simple people somehow got it all correct, which to me indicates that it's a collection of writings written by ancient goat herders and poets and kings, but more than that, it was inspired by a creator, by someone who knew the answers, and he downloaded those answers into those authors so that they would preserve those writings, pass them on for thousands of years, extremely accurately, so that today we can read the Bible, compare it to ancient manuscripts 2,000 years old and older, and they match word for word.
They just found in Israel, this is the last 2 months, they just found a piece from King Hezekiah mentioning King David. They found this piece with his seal. Like, it's incredible what they're finding right now.
In the Wonder Center, we have the actual jar handle with a seal from King Hezekiah himself, with his actual seal. Pressed, you can see it. It's under glass. You can clearly see it, and it means belonging to the king. Okay, so it's actually from one of the palace collections, right? People can see these evidences. They're all over. People can see some of the dinosaur fossils in the Wonder Center that, again, we're breaking open and finding soft tissue. People can see trees that are supposedly 90 million years old, and yet they still haven't fossilized. People can see the evidence of meteors that fell on Campo del Cielo in Argentina, the field of the heavens in Argentina, that fell from space, that you can literally touch the evidence. It's all around you, and all of this is pointing us right back to biblical history being correct. Why should we be ashamed? Why should we call it a faith-based belief? We should call this the evidence-based belief that supports our Christian faith.
Yeah, I do want to get into the topic of communism.
Yeah.
We're going to get flagged on YouTube for this. It may get deleted. So
I'm going to...
You mentioned Joseph Stalin earlier.
Yeah. I'm not... I won't try to get into events that happened in a certain world war. I'll stick to Stalin for a moment, because that might help with the flagging. Stalin was an atheist.
Yes.
He was the leader of the Soviet Union. He promoted atheistic education in the public school system, in his school system. He killed millions of individuals.
Potentially hundreds of millions.
Very potentially. Yeah. Anytime I talk about historical events, I try to stay on the conservative side, knowing that someone is going to say, yeah, but you can't prove it's hundreds of millions. It was probably hundreds of millions, but I'm just going to say it was millions. Yes. Okay, he imprisoned millions upon millions of individuals. He did atrocious acts. Okay, what was his justification? He's walking with a childhood friend one day when he volunteers a pretty revealing statement. He said, they're fooling us. There is no God. I'll lend you a book to read, and it will show you that this world is quite different from what you imagined, and all this talk about God is sheer nonsense. And his friend is like, Joseph, what are you talking about? Where are you getting this from? And he said, I'm going to lend you a book to read. Darwin. Mm-hmm. You must read it. Yep. So is belief in evolution bad? Is it dangerous? Well, in that case, it was dangerous, because belief that we're nothing more than animals, the result of millions of years of chance, resulted in a leader abusing his power and saying, well, if we're nothing more than animals, what's one animal killing another animal? This is for the betterment of society. That's the dangers of this, and that's something that I think trying to be your own God can lead to, but it's the dangers that trying to follow the philosophers of the world can lead to, as opposed to, again, following the very simple commands of the Creator himself, who's like, it's not right to murder. Yep. Thou shalt not be murdering people, right? I mean, it should be common knowledge, but again, doing away with those things and believing in Darwinian evolution has allowed atrocities to happen in society that has shaped this planet and left stains on society that we will never get rid of.
And guess what? That breaks God's heart.
Yes, it does.
I say all that because there is forces of evil that want us to live in a system like that so that they are not held accountable to the Creator. Shame on us for letting them take over and do those things.
Stuart, we have to be bold.
Yes.
It's time.
We are in a time right now that's so pinnacle.
Yeah.
That if we do not step up in our faith and we do not say, hey, Jesus is actually Lord and he's coming back, and he is also, before he's a God of love, he is a God of wrath. And the wrath was poured out on his son, Jesus. We need to be bold.
That's right.
And that wrath, if you do not have a relationship with him, I'm saying this publicly, if you do not have a relationship with Jesus, you will be separated from God for all eternity and you will suffer in hell.
And that's not what he wants.
That's not what he wants.
He literally died so that you did not have to do that. He loved you so much.
Yes.
That he provided a way, even though we mess things up, even though we try to disobey any way we can, he's like, I don't want that for you. I want you as a part of my family for eternity. And not only that, but I've made it so simple. Let's just say that you've messed up. Let's just say that you've gone so far astray that you feel that it's no way that you could ever return. So you might as well just keep living that way. I'm going to make it super simple for you. I'm going to tell you, repent, acknowledge that your conscience has been telling you that you've been messing up for a long time.
Yep.
Say, I want you to be Lord over my life to help me not to do these things again. And I want you to come into my life, Jesus, and be with me for eternity so that I can be with you for eternity. It's so simple. And we try to make it so complicated. And we try to say, yeah, it's just not worth it. No, it is. And I hope that someone listening has been encouraged, because I tell you, it's a downer for me when I see the scavenger hunts put out by other museums around this country, secular museums, like big, we're talking about Smithsonian and all of these others, where school children are writing, what did you learn in this field trip through the museum? Oh, well, I learned that millions of years ago we happened by chance and all. What does that do to your self-worth? We've got teen suicide rates skyrocketing right now. We have 22 veteran suicides every single day. We've got people
we have a drug epidemic.
We've got a drug epidemic where people see no value in their life, so why not just medicate it? And that's turning into addictions and things that people have trouble controlling. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've taught society that they're the result of chance over vast amounts of time, when in reality, if we knew, you say imago Dei, if we knew that we had purpose through Christ, that we are created in God's image, that we are wonderfully made, this biological miracle from our signer and designer, what a difference that would make in society. What a difference that would make for the last 2 generations who have been spoon-fed a narrative. Mm-hmm. And what a difference that would make in a world that is struggling to find purpose. In universities today, we're pushed a lot of knowledge, but very little wisdom and very little understanding.
Yes.
I want to understand the knowledge of the scientific world, the knowledge of the natural world, and how it all comes together.
Solomon asked him for wisdom.
Yeah.
And God said, hey, I'm going to give you all these other things. We could ask God, we could ask Yahweh for wisdom. He's going to give it to us.
Yes.
Man, David, this has been awesome. Tell us about the Wonder Center. If somebody were to come here and they were asking questions about the Wonder Center, like, okay, you point to a creator, but I want to know more about Jesus, this individual Jesus.
Yeah.
Just walk us through like some questions that people may have had about that have come from the Wonder Center.
Yes.
And how to get pointed to Jesus.
In fact, we're working on an exhibit hall that goes more in depth right now, but we have a lot of secularists come through the museum.
Of course.
And they're enjoying the science content. Then they question. And if they don't question, we don't answer. But if they question, then we do have those walking around the museum answering questions. Since we have our production studios, our planetarium, our ministry offices on site, I'm often walking around the museum, and I will attempt to answer questions.
Which is rare. Like, I want to say how rare that is for a curator of a museum to be actually walking around to be able to talk about the exhibits. Like, I've been to a lot of museums, and it is extraordinarily rare to have that.
You know, it fulfills me so much because I'm so passionate about what we do that to see the eyes of a child light up when they ask a question and I further explain it and they're like, I get it. I just touched it and now I understand it. And I'm like, I'm seeing it with my eyes. There's a physical thing right here. And yet that makes sense, right? To see that happen is so incredible. For teens and adults, you know, I'll have 18-year-old agnostics call me up because of something they saw on social media on TikTok that I did where I'm talking about science and then relate it to a Christian walk, you know, and they're like, normally Christian content turns us off, but this guy's talking about real science. We're kind of intrigued, you know. They'll occasionally call up the office and I'll have them patch them through to me and I can talk them through some of these questions that they've had about the creator and how important it is to understand who that creator is. Again, it's not random chance. It's not even aliens. It's not, we could go through the list of world religions. Ultimately, there's only one that answers those questions of an entity outside of the universe that created the universe and then stepped into the universe. And then he gave us the history of how he did it. And that is God's word, the Holy Bible. And ultimately, that's belief in Yahweh. So to see that take place and to see people's eyes opened is just, again, we don't push it. You can walk through, and if you don't want anything about religion, you may see some design references. You're going to see some references about Jesus, about God, but you don't have to read those plaques, right? You can go through and have the entire experience as if this was any science museum in the world. But we don't want to be just any science museum. We want to point you back to truth, and that is the truth of God's word.
Well, David, before we wrap up, let me pray for you.
I'd love that.
Yeah. Lord Jesus, thank you for David. Thank you for the Wonder Center. God, I just pray that you would bless this organization. God, I pray that 10 million people would walk through these doors. And God, that even one would question who you are and come into relationship with you. Amen. Lord, thank you for your faithfulness. God, I pray that your hand is on this place, that it's on David's life, and that you would continue to bless him through his media and through his company. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, that's a wrap.
Thank you, Stuart.
Yeah, come to the Wonder Center in Dixon, Tennessee. Enjoy some good food. Visit Country View Market. Bless that local operation and support some Amish farmers.
Amen.